Friends, welcome back to the channel where fitness meets philosophy. Sometimes they might get along, sometimes they might clash, but we always learn something. So today's subject is answering one question that is very close to my heart. And I think a lot of you might be interested in this subject, which is fitness and aging, how we lose some fitness capacities as we age. So the question will be around, at which age do we reach peak fitness? Short answer, there's no short answer. Fitness has multiple pillars, and we've talked about those pillars in previous videos and explained in depth how each pillar is different, but also very important to contribute to your overall fitness. So today we're gonna break down by quality, so by capacity, actually not quality, not by age. So the fitness is formed of many capacities. Each capacity moves at its own pace as we age. So we're going to have an honest breakdown of these capacities. So as we age, we always feel that we become less fit. If we let ourselves go without any intervention, we tend to decline, okay? So this is how the world works. If you don't train, your muscle will atrophy. So why is it that we lose this explosiveness and raw power at first? Because it is very reliant on the central nervous system. So this kind of capacity deteriorates before our muscles age. The neural aging precedes the muscular aging. The central nervous system firing rate declines before muscle quality. So that's why we tend to lose this first. Power is the least age-forgiving quality. So keep that in mind. Power, explosiveness is the least age-forgiving quality. And age-related loss of speed reflects declining neural efficiency, not muscular failure. So neural efficiency gets less, and that's why raw power gets less. So capacity number 2 is maximal strength, and this capacity tends to peak between 25 and 35. Again, for the last time, I'm going to say that this is roughly an average for most people. So you can just something to think about when looking at this capacity. I'm going to throw this number 25 to 35 just to see exactly on the spectrum where it falls. So Aristotle said that strength endures much longer because it is developed, not gifted. So strength, no one is born very strong. Some people have more tendencies genetically, but you develop the strength. This is why it persists for a longer time. And basically the loss of strength is the inactivity that you do or not do. So the strength loss is driven by inactivity rather than age. So keep that in mind. And neural efficiency as well. So as we train, as we practice, as we exercise, neural efficiency compensates, and this is how the body adapts to muscle loss. So things become easier because this pathway is paved many times, and to compensate the loss of strength. And this is how amazing our bodies and our biology is. So older lifters, for example, still respond robustly to load because of being used to lift, training for a long time, always being active. So the most important thing, the take-home message from quality or capacity number 2, which is maximal strength, is strength decline is largely in consequence of inactivity, not aging itself. Third capacity is muscle mass and hypertrophy. And this capacity tends to peak between 20 and 40 and starts to decline and decrease after 40. The most important part is that our anabolic sensitivity starts to increase as we get older. That's why now we hear a lot about hormonal replacement therapy. Testosterone replacement therapy, for example, is something to combat this anabolic resistance, to increase the amount of testosterone that your body produces. And this anabolic resistance, once you produce less testosterone, you tend to lose muscle mass, which is very obvious. Now, most important part when it comes to preserving muscle mass is mechanical tension. So this is the best stimulus that you can ever have. And mechanical tension is actually training, stressing, putting stress on your muscles. Now, Moving on to one very important aspect, which is muscle memory. And muscle memory is kind of the commercial name to it. Muscle memory means, I'm going to quote John Locke here, the body remembers what the will once demanded of it. And when we train, when we practice, when we exercise for a long time, our body remembers that. And how the body remembers that? By producing myonuclei. These myonuclei are the factory that produces muscles, and they are responsible for what we call muscle memory. So as we age, the body remembers. So if we keep on training it, the stimulus is always there, and our decline and loss of muscle mass goes very slow. All right? So don't worry about it. Just keep training and keep having the stimulus, which is mechanical tension training, strength training in specific. Moving on to capacity number 4, which is aerobic capacity, or VO₂ Max, which peaks between 20 and 30, and its decline is also very natural, but as well very slow. So the decline is between 5 to 10% per decade if untrained. So again, if untrained, 5 to 10% per every 10 years. And you can slow this down, actually half it. So it's half the 5 or 10% or somewhere in between if you do aerobic training, endurance training. And high intensity work as well helps in that, indirectly and a little bit. So it does increase your aerobic capacity, high intensity training, but you shouldn't neglect aerobic training. To quote Seneca, endurance is not about out-training time, but refusing to surrender to it. And this is how, by refusing to surrender to it, by training, by doing more aerobic training, you have the decrease rate. So you have your deterioration by not surrendering to time. And aerobic capacity declines with age, but regular training significantly attenuates loss, so significantly slows down the loss. Training slows down aging. That's the take-home message here. Capacity number 5, which is work capacity and recovery. So recovery is the main title here. This capacity peaks between 25 and 35, and by peaks, I think we should better to talk about it by declining after 35. So our ability to recover declines usually in our mid-30s. How do we feel that? So sleep depth costs more. So if we are in depth to sleep, it costs us more fatigue. Systematic fatigue also accumulates faster. So our entire body and the entire system feels more fatigued faster. We can all notice that when we are very young in our teens, doesn't matter if we sleep for a couple of nights or don't. It's almost the same. We feel almost the same. We can recover quicker. And what is important here when it comes to recovery is our bodies become less tolerant to volume before becoming less tolerant to capacity, to intensity, sorry. So the length, the volume of our training, so we need to decrease the volume of our training, not the intensity as we age, because of recovery. So because we recover slower, so that's why we need to decrease the volume. And the most important part in recovery is sleep. So sleep is a major determinant of performance and injury risk, especially with age. So we tend to be more prone to injury when we age. That's why we need to sleep, we need to recover. And to quote Hannah Arendt here, the illusion of limitless action collapses when the body demands rest. So when we need to rest, we realize that our action is not limitless, our energy is not limitless. And when the body demands rest, the body demands rest. So you need to stop all action, otherwise the cost will be higher and higher and higher, especially as you age. What youth spends in force, age repays in precision. That's a quote from Confucius that I decided to start with our capacity number 6, which is coordination and skill efficiency. And the nice thing about our bodies is as we grow older, as we get older, We lose power, of course, which is, okay, a bummer, but we tend to gain more precision. So the peak of coordination and skill efficiency is between 35 and 55, which, as you notice, it's a bit further down older adulthood, middle age. Not very old. So we're not talking about 70, 80-year-old people, because coordination will start to decrease there. But here we're talking about between 35 and 55. This is where the efficiency improves to compensate the loss of explosive power. And older individuals, for example, compensate this loss of power by improving cognitive motor efficiency. So this gets better with age. Power gets worse with age. Body is smart in different way. It's different kind of smart. All right, let's move. Today is injury resilience. Our injuries, the risk of injury gets higher and higher as we get older. And I'm gonna quote my man Epictetus here. It is not the body that betrays us, but our failure to govern it. Amazing. Most of the time, it is our fault when we get injured, instead of our muscles being weaker or our joint being stiffer, or etc. So we need to be smart. We need to be able to manage our bodies in a correct way. Injury risk is tied to workload. So injury risk that is tied to workload spikes. So the more workload, the higher the injury risk. Our tendons stiffen, not weaken. So this is very important to understand. The tendons do not get weak, they just get stiff. You need to manage that, again, with managing our bodies. And experience reduces catastrophic errors. We talked about before that as we get older, we tend to become better at doing things, more efficient. That's why, to compensate the loss of, for example, muscle mass or pure raw power and strength. So it is very important to manage the load, because poor load management is where most injuries come from, and not the age-related tissue failure. So it's not the failure of our tissues that gets us injured, it's our mismanagement of our bodies. Psychological fitness, which is capacity number 8, tends to mature after 40. So to quote Spinoza here, freedom is not power over the body, but understanding its limits. And we tend to be able to understand our bodies more, learn more about ourselves as we get older. More emotional regulation, less ego lifting. Maybe not everyone, but less ego lifting. Ego lifting becomes something that you try to get away from, because you try it, you might get injured, and then you try it again, get injured, but then after a couple of injuries, you think, okay, better keep the ego at bay. So emotional regulation improves across the lifespan despite physical decline. That's very important. Psychological fitness. So capacity number 9, and our last capacity of today, is longevity. And longevity is mostly thought about after the age of 40, 50, when you start to feel age weighing in on you. So most young people do not think about the decrease in their fitness, do not think about the decrease, loss of muscles, loss of coordination, all these capacities that they tend to deteriorate and decrease with age. You start to think about them after 40. That's where you start to think about longevity and training for longevity, to last longer. To quote Nietzsche here, the strongest do not peak highest, they last longer. So it's the long game that you have to play. It's not the peaks. And sustainability, so to sustain your body, to keep it good for a long period of time, beats peak performance. If you're in it for longevity, you're in it for the long game. You're not in it for short peaks. Short peaks, higher risk of injury. If you're a professional athlete, you have to go for peaks. If you're the average Joe and you want to live longer and healthier, you're in it for the long game. Consistency beats intensity, always. Adaptation beats maximization. And the long arcs always outperform spikes. Okay, so think about not too many spikes, but a good average for a long period of time. This is where you start to think about these things after 40. Finally, age does not remove fitness. It forces a reallocation of what matters. Management, better management as we get older. Aging doesn't take fitness away. It forces a critical choice. Chase what fades or cultivate what endures. I'm going to leave you with that, friends. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and share this video, and I'll see you next time.